Thank you for joining me today. My name is Sean Egglestone and I'm a registered dietitian, and today I'm going to be going over my presentation about heart-healthy fats. Before we can get into fats specifically, it's important to understand macronutrients in general. Macronutrients are food compounds that we need in large quantities, often grams, ounces, or pounds. The three that we most often talk about are proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. In my video titled Nutrient Density and Weight Loss, I go over fiber and water as two other macronutrients that are often not discussed but are very important when it comes to weight management. Micronutrients are needed in small quantities, often in milligrams or micrograms. These include vitamins, minerals, and protective plant compounds called phytonutrients. Now, all plant foods are made up of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, but meat only has protein and fat. Dairy, on the other hand, is the only animal product that does have carbohydrates in the form of lactose sugar. It's important to keep in mind that plant foods are an excellent source of fiber and water. Fiber is only found in plant foods and not in animal products. These are what macronutrients look like, their actual atomic structure. It's not critical that you understand or memorize exactly what these structures look like, but just that they all differ. They all look differently, and that allows them to have unique functions that the others can't provide. So why are there different macronutrients? Well, like I mentioned in the previous slide, they all have different functions. Carbohydrates, for example, are energy rich. They're abundant in nature, and they're very easily used for fuel for exercise and brain health. They're often combined with fiber and phytonutrients. These are compounds that help reduce our risk for things like colon cancer and heart disease and diabetes. Protein is important for tissue repair, chemical processes, and a whole host of functions that can't be simulated by carbohydrates or fats. It's needed in small to moderate amounts. Now, animal protein and plant protein have different effects on the body. If you want to learn more about that, I recommend you check out my protein video. Fats, on the other hand, are energy dense. They're important for cell structure, they help keep us warm, they protect our organs. Now, like proteins, most high-fat foods contain harmful substances such as cholesterol, saturated fat. There's no fiber in most high-fat foods, and they often are low in antioxidants. So if you check out some of my other presentations, especially the nutrient density presentation, it'll go over more about what else is in high-fat diets and why they're not good for optimal health. If you're interested in learning more about the ketogenic diet, I also have a paper on my website, seantherd.com, that I highly recommend you check out. So what are fats? Well, we know they're important for hair and skin health, temperature regulation, tissue integrity and protection. Fat is found in nearly all foods, including plant foods and animal foods. Although it's found in large quantities, mostly in animal foods, such as meat and dairy, there are very few plant foods that actually contain a lot of fat, such as avocados, coconuts, and nuts and seeds. At the end of this presentation, we'll go over some sample diets, and you'll see from the types of meals that I eat exactly how low in fat plant foods can be. Now, fats, unlike carbohydrates and proteins, have 9 calories per gram. Now, we're not going to go into too much detail today on this, but in some of my other presentations, I go into energy density, nutrient density, and how we can manipulate our macronutrient ratios for optimal weight loss. It's important to keep in mind that there's a high conversion rate of dietary fat to body fat, so if you overeat on dietary fat, your body can very easily store that. Whereas if you overeat on carbohydrates or proteins, you won't gain quite as much weight because your body will burn some of those calories in the conversion to body fat. One of the most common questions that I get when working with patients is about the different types of fat. So here we have saturated fat. Saturated fat is a solid at room temperature. So I think of saturated, S, solid, solid at room temperature. The majority of the saturated fat that's found in the American diet comes from dairy products. There's also high amounts of saturated fat in meat, and only a very few amount of plant foods actually contain saturated fat. The current recommendation is to actually limit your saturated fat as much as possible, no more than 15 grams per day, and that's because saturated fat will raise your LDL cholesterol and it'll raise your total cholesterol, which increases your risk for heart disease. Unsaturated fats, on the other hand, are liquid at room temperature. So think avocado oil, sesame oil, olive oil, canola oil. Because of that bend in their structure, as you can see in that upper right hand photo, that bend doesn't allow the fatty acids to stack nicely in a solid form, so they're a liquid at room temperature. Now there's unsaturated fat, again, in nearly all whole food sources. Monounsaturated fat is good for our heart, it's good for our health, whereas polyunsaturated fat is pretty neutral in terms of its health benefits. Monounsaturated fat can help lower your bad cholesterol and your total cholesterol, but only if it replaces solid saturated fat in your diet. So adding olive oil to your meals doesn't make them healthier. It's only if you replace solid fat with liquid fat that you see benefits. There's a third type of fat called trans fats. These are actually the worst for your health, worse than saturated fat. You'll find these in foods like baked goods. They're also found naturally in meat and dairy. The current recommendation is to have as close to zero trans fats as possible. When we look at labels, such as the one on the right, you'll see it'll label it as partially hydrogenated. If you see that partially hydrogenated, that means that this product contains trans fats. Now, companies can put 0 grams trans fats on their label if it's less than half of a gram. They're allowed to round down. So if you're looking at products, you could look for partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, although I try and pick out foods in the grocery store that don't have labels on them at all. Here we have an avocado on the left-hand side and a 3-ounce hamburger patty on the right-hand side. We're not going to compare these two products per se because the portion sizes are different and the calories are different, so they haven't been standardized for a fair comparison. But let's just take a look at the avocado. We see that there's 29 grams of fat, so this is a high-fat product, but you'll notice that the saturated fat is only 4 grams. The overall distribution of fat is towards the monounsaturated. So that monounsaturated is going to be good for our heart and really help balance out the negative effects of saturated fat. And because this is a whole food plant source, some of that fat that's in the avocado you won't even absorb in your intestines because it'll be trapped inside the cell wall. This avocado's got a lot of potassium and it's got 13 grams of fiber, which is almost half of the daily recommended amount of fiber for women and just about a third for men. The 3-ounce burger on the right hand side, you'll notice that while the total fat isn't a whole lot, a big portion of that is saturated fat, 3.4 grams. You'll also notice that because this is an animal product, it also contains trans fats. And it doesn't matter if this is organic or not, it's going to have trans fats in it. Now there's also cholesterol because animal products have cholesterol. There's not a lot of sodium, but most people have cheese and a bun with their burger, which will jack up that sodium really high. Looking at these two products, You get about 300 calories from 2 plain baked potatoes, but you get almost 400 from this thing of fries from McDonald's. And this is an important comparison because what we know is that if you eat 2 baked potatoes, you'd be pretty full. They take up a lot of space in your stomach. The fries have been deep fried. So you take a potato and you cover it in oil, you fry it. And that's a problem because you're increasing the caloric content without increasing the size or the weight of the food. So it's not going to fill you up any more than the potato, but it's going to have more calories. And I touch on this topic more on my presentation about nutrient density and weight loss. Another common question that I get from patients is, well, what's the best kind of oil? What oil do you recommend? And what we can see here from the vitamin and mineral content of olive oil is it's nearly zero across the entire board. Now there's a little bit of vitamin E and vitamin K, but those aren't exclusive to olive oil. You can get them from other whole food sources. But when you take olives and you press out the fat from them, all of the vitamins, minerals, protective plant compounds, those are all bound to the fiber that ends up getting thrown out. And so you're consuming the oil without any of the health benefits of the fruit. And oil is 4,000 calories per pound. It's very, very high in calories compared to other foods. There's no fiber, there's no water, there's no protein, and it's just all fat. So again, choosing a liquid oil like this is better than butter, but adding additional oil to your diet doesn't make it healthier. I recommend no more than 2 tablespoons per person per day of added oils. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, we really need to think of food as a whole. We know that cholesterol and saturated fat are not good for our heart. Now, there's a lot of misinformation online, but the overwhelming majority of the scientific research, the double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials, and these highly controlled intervention trials where they look at people in prisons and they have 100% control of what they eat, and they can change their diet, adding things in, removing things, standardizing for things like calories and fat intake and cholesterol, and they can see changes in their disease risk. So we know when looking at these highly controlled studies that saturated fat and cholesterol are not good for our heart. Meat, dairy, eggs, and oil, these are all high-fat foods. There's no protective plant compounds in them. There's no fiber. They're relatively low in antioxidants compared to fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Animal products are typically high in what we call heme iron. Heme iron is a type of iron that gets absorbed into our intestines, and our body doesn't regulate it well, and so it's a pro-oxidant. It can increase our risk for heart disease. There's also compounds like choline, carnitine, and when we high heat cook meat, we form compounds such as advanced glycated end products, heterocyclic amines, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So what this means is that animal products that are high in fat also contain other compounds that are very detrimental to our health, and when we cook them, they form compounds that are even worse for our health. So if you want to learn more about this topic, I highly recommend you check out my ketogenic paper on my website, seantheRD.com. High-fat diets cause our arteries to stiffen for 3 to 4 hours after a meal, and that's a problem because our arteries are supposed to constrict and expand based on blood pressure and exercise and temperature. And when we eat a high-fat meal, that really impairs our arterial blood flow. There's a complete, utter lack of scientific research supporting high-fat diets, oils, eggs, and meat for heart disease risk reduction. When you look at research coming out of nearly every major institution worldwide, whether it's the USDA, whether it's Stanford, Harvard, UC Davis, they are all in agreement that diets high in plant foods and low in animal foods and low in added fat and low in fat from animal foods is the best way for optimal health. If you haven't heard of Dean Ornish, I recommend you check out his website. You can go to Google and type in Ornish Spectrum Diet or Dean Ornish Diet. It's been the only diet proven to actually reverse plaque formation in our heart, and it only has 10% of its calories coming from fat with minimal oils. You really need to get your fats from whole plant foods, avocados, coconuts, nuts and seeds, whole grains, beans, and avoid most oils, again, 2 tablespoons per person per day or less. Avoiding saturated fat that's found in high-fat dairy products like milk and cheese and also from meat. You want to look out for hidden sources, such as those found in chips, crackers, cookies, and snack foods. So most of the foods that are in the aisles in the grocery store, when most people think of tortilla chips, they think, well, it's a carbohydrate. But most tortilla chips have 50% or more of their calories coming from added oils. And remember, there's no safe amount of trans fats. The optimal amount is 0. So this is one way that the food industry tries to fool you when you're looking at meat products or you're looking at dairy. They'll use the percent of fat by weight in the product and not by the calories. So in this 4-ounce portion of beef, it's going to weigh 113 grams, 11 of which are total fat. So they just do 11 grams out of 113 grams, gives a 90% lean or a 10% fat product. But as a dietitian, I recommend looking at your fat as a percentage of total calories. So looking at it as 100 calories from fat out of 200 calories total is really a 50% fat product. Just keep that in mind. Even products like milk. Whole milk is around 3.1% fat. So 2% milk is not 2% of the fat from whole milk. It's actually close to 35% of its calories from fat, and 1% milk is about 20% of its calories from fat. So 2% and 1% milk are really not that much better than whole milk. So let's take a look at some meals that I eat. This is my breakfast that I have every day. It's oatmeal and mixed berries and some flax seeds, and oftentimes I'll have a banana before I go to work. So in this bowl of oatmeal, plus a banana is going to add another 100 calories or so. But out of 375 calories, I'm getting 13 grams of fiber, which is awesome. The total fat is pretty low, but it's got an adequate amount of protein, it's got plenty of fiber, and there's no cholesterol in this food. Now, sometimes I'll have smoothies. If you want to learn more about smoothie recipes or making smoothies, I recommend you check out my YouTube channel, Feeling Fit. This is another lunch idea. Here we have a baked potato, some rice, beans, corn, and peas. Again, out of 600 calories, only 2 grams of fat, less than half a gram of saturated fat. Now, it's important to keep in mind, plant foods are often very low in total fat, saturated fat. There's no cholesterol, and they're high in fiber. So even if you do have something like peanuts to have as a snack, some of that fat in the peanuts will go undigested. You won't actually absorb some of that fat because the fiber helps keep it contained. This meal here, we have a black bean burger, a cornbread muffin, acorn squash with a bunch of veggies, and a pasta salad. Now, you'll notice on the right-hand side that the sodium is quite high, and that's because of the cornbread muffin and the black bean burgers. So one of the ways I would improve this is to get rid of those 2 products and add in some beans. This meal has 12 grams of fat. Wow, that's a huge increase from the other 2. And that's because of the added oils in the dressing on the salad, some added oils in the burger, and again, added oils in the muffin. So a lot of this fat is coming from added oils. It's not naturally found in corn and beans and vegetables. Here's another meal here. Now, for me, this is certainly not enough calories. For most people, I'd recommend you need way more than 300 calories for lunch. But this is just a great example of plant foods and how much you can have with such low calorie content. So when people are looking to lose weight, rather than focusing on portion sizes, I focus on the types of food that you have and switching to more nutrient dense, lower calorie foods and cutting out some of the higher calorie foods like junk food and meat and oils and snack foods. One last meal here, we have some vegetables, some rice, some beans. Again, around 600 calories, 2 grams of fat. So I'm not here to demonize fat. I'm not saying fat is bad at all. I actually encourage fat intake. I just want your fat to come from whole plant food sources like avocados and whole grains and nuts and seeds, and to steer away from fat that's found in dairy, meat, and added oils, because that fat is often combined with saturated fat, which is bad for our heart, and trans fats, which is terrible for our health, and some of those other compounds I mentioned earlier that really increase our risk for chronic illness. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you found some value in the content in this video. If you haven't checked out my website, SeanTheRD.com, I'll have this video up there, as well as my other 2 macronutrient videos, my nutrient density and weight loss videos, my ketogenic paper, and a few other videos that will go over everything that you need to know about healthy eating so that you can live the best life possible. Thanks for watching.